Hey, Strategy Simplified, it's Japheth here, and I'm quickly popping in to tell you about Strategy Sprint. Strategy Sprint is a week-long virtual consulting project that allows you to add US-based work experience to your resume. So you work in a small team, you get mentored by a former McKinsey, Bain, or BCG consultant, and you solve a strategic growth issue for a real-world client. So that means you gain incredible skills and experience that looks amazing on your resume. We are running several sprint projects throughout this year. Check out the dates and the link to register at the link in this episode's show notes. We look forward to welcoming you to a future Strategy Sprint project. Attention, future consultants. If you're going into consulting, you're going to face a case interview, which is why we create all this amazing content. Today specifically is extra special because we've got two Bainies running through a really interesting CPG case. So we've got Ed, who is an incoming associate consultant as of the time of this recording, and Jenny Rae, who's a former associate consultant. So you'll get to see how they run through a case. Jenny Rae as the interviewer and Ed on the hot seat. The client in the case is a manufacturer and seller of packaged cookies. They've recently seen a decline in profits, looking for help to identify the root cause of the issue and reverse that decline. Make sure that you've got your pencil and your paper. You follow along to this case to see how you can solve it, what you come up with, the answers and recommendation that you come up with, and then compare it to what Ed comes up with in the case. There is a link in the show notes where you can see Ed and Jenny Rae run this through on video. You get to see it real time, you get to see Ed take the notes, you get to see exactly what they're seeing, you get the exhibits and all that good stuff. Link in the show notes again. Finally, before we get into this, we'd love to get your rating and review on Strategy Simplified, whether you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And finally, before we get into the episode, we'd love your rating and review of Strategy Simplified. No matter whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or somewhere else, a rating and review really helps the show reach more listeners. Thank you in advance, and let's get into this case interview example.
Hey, Ed, excited to walk through this case with you. Just for context, this is a BCG-style case, and so I'm going to look for you to lead me through it. If there are numbers or exhibits, it'll be up to you to put some information in your structure, and then we will dive in from there.
Great.
Sound good?
Sounds good.
Okay, awesome. So let's get started. Our client today is a national manufacturer and seller of packaged cookies in the United States called CookieCo. In the last 2 to 3 years, they've seen a decline in profits, whereas the rest of the industry has experienced healthy growth. They've come to us to identify the root cause of this issue and how they can reverse it.
Perfect. So just to clarify, our client today is CookieCo. They are a national manufacturer and seller of packaged cookies in the United States. And over the past 2 to 3 years, they've actually noticed a decline in profitability, whereas all their competitors and the market in general seems to actually be stagnant, if not growing.
Exactly.
Perfect. Okay. So just a few questions before I jump into my framework.
Awesome.
Their scope for this is just the United States, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, wonderful. And can we assume that they maybe just provide cookies? They don't sell any other sort of packaged goods? And if they do, we're just focusing on the cookies today.
So yes, they do sell other products, but our only focus today is on their cookie segment.
Wonderful. Sounds good. Do you mind if I take a few minutes to structure my thoughts?
Go for it.
At Palm Tree, we're not just about numbers and strategies and M&A advisory. We're also about culture, and we're proud of ours, built on collaboration, development, and community. One of our cornerstone core values, a value that speaks to the type of environment fostered here at Palm Tree, is stay frosty. Stay frosty means not being afraid of rolling up your sleeves to do the hard work. It means taking care of yourself so you can show up when it really matters. It means having ice in your veins when the pressure is on, and also knowing how to let down your hair and have some fun. If you picture yourself as a stay frosty type of person, and you are seeking more than just a job, but a place where you can truly grow your career and your M&A skill set, reach out and inquire about opportunities at Palm Tree. There is a link in this episode's show notes where you can learn more and apply.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm ready to walk you through my thoughts for this.
Amazing.
So when it comes to profitability, obviously there's two main things that can increase or decrease profitability: the revenues and the costs. So they're actually two of the things that I want to include in my thoughts here, as well as the market itself. So we're thinking competitors, consumer preferences. But let's dive into revenues a little bit more. When it comes to revenues, two of the things that I think could really impact this are actually how many cookies they're selling or the price at which they're selling them at.
Okay.
And I'm going to keep it a little bit surface level now. Maybe we can dive into them later if we have any information on that.
Okay.
In terms of costs, there's fixed and variable. Fixed might include labor or the warehousing costs, distribution, things like that. And variable would be ingredients and raw materials. In terms of the market itself, obviously we've noticed that the competitors are actually increasing. So they are eating up our market share. So one thing that might be causing that is maybe some sort of innovation in the cookie space, maybe a new product or a new type of product. And linked to that could be some sort of consumer preference. Maybe consumers are trying to go sugar-free now, and we're not catering to that area of the market. So with that, let's maybe dive into revenues and costs. Do we have any information on that?
So we do, but first of all, I just have a question about your hypothesis.
Yeah, absolutely.
So talk to me about whether you think it is revenues or costs that are the key issue here. As we know, they're declining in profitability. The market has been growing. What do you think is going on?
Yeah, well, my initial hypothesis with that would be if the market is growing itself, we are probably incurring either more costs or making less revenue per cost, i.e. our margin is probably decreasing. Again, if the whole market's improving and all our competitors are improving, we're probably selling just fine, would be my initial guess. Obviously, I'd want some more information on that. But I would imagine that the root of that would be somewhere in the costs.
Okay, awesome. Well, I actually do have a breakdown of costs. Can you walk me through the costs that you talked through before? I know you mentioned some of them in your structure.
Yeah.
And kind of do the same thing, right? Just give me, hey, what do you think are the costs for this business? And what do you think would be the first place you would look there?
Yeah, so let's almost go in a chronological journey of the cookie, right? So they're making the cookie itself. That's where I think a lot of the variable costs are going to come in terms of ingredients, maybe running some of the factories in terms of the per unit cost there.
Okay.
And then once we've actually made them, we need to do a few things for them. We need to store them somewhere, we need to package them, and we need to distribute them.
Okay.
And I would imagine that the root costs here are probably going to be somewhere in terms of the storing or the distribution of the cookies. Maybe there's something, I might even steer more clear from the distribution just because that might be something that would affect the whole market instead of just our company.
Okay.
But I'd love to know if you have more information on
Yeah, I think that's a good insight. Just talking back through some of the other things, talk about the macroeconomic environment that we've been in, right? 2020, 2021, 2022. Walk through some of what you think the context is. What costs would you expect to increase and which ones would you not expect to increase? You mentioned distribution. I think that's really insightful. Can you just give us a little bit more layering on that?
Yeah, we're talking about distribution in particular. Obviously, we've been through a lot in the past few years, whether it's been pandemics and other sort of economic factors, maybe some sort of recession that's coming along. And I think that one of the big things there is that and
you say it so casually, like, just recessions and pandemics,
exactly. Well,
earthquakes and tornadoes, as you do.
Yeah, luckily I'm not the CEO of a cookie company, so I don't have to worry about it too much.
Not yet.
Not yet. I think one of the big things with that would be when it comes to distribution, with a pandemic and with a recession, that's definitely a cost that could increase if the actual supply of labor for distribution, whether it's drivers, whether it's some sort of freight operators, that is naturally going to be a little bit lower. And so if that's the case, obviously just with supply and demand, that's going to be something that's going to come at a premium compared to what it might have been 3, 4, 5 years ago.
We'll be right back after this quick break.
Have you ever heard a new digital trend and thought to yourself, okay, does this really matter? Asking the right questions helps you cut through the noise and get down to what matters most. I'm Jim Hertzfeld, host of the What If, So What podcast, where we discover what's possible with digital and figure out how to make it real by asking what if, so what, and most importantly, now what? Subscribe and listen, and together we can turn big ideas into tangible actions so you can get shit done.
Yep. Okay, good. I'm just making a couple of notes here.
Yeah. No. worries.
Fantastic. Okay, so so picking one, what's your number one area of cost that you'd want to look at here?
Well, I know we've driven into the distribution channels. If we had any information on raw materials or maybe a portfolio of the breakdown of costs, that would be really interesting. But if I had to go right now, I think distribution is probably where I would be focusing.
Okay, awesome. Well, I do have one exhibit. Let me put this over in front of you. And so if you want to just kind of walk me through what you think the exhibit says here, we've got, a breakdown of some of the costs as you've requested. And so tell me what you think this exhibit is talking through.
Yeah, so this is great. So it looks here like we are talking about the previous 3 years in terms of a breakdown of costs and actually what's happening over those 3 years. And immediately my eyes are going to storage and warehousing. Seems like the biggest increase. I'm going to work through them left to right as that seems a little bit easier.
Okay.
So in terms of raw materials, that is incrementally increasing almost at a linear rate. That's not actually something I would be terrified about just because I would expect that to happen given what's happened with COVID and with recessions. And so that would be something that's expected.
Why would you expect the raw materials would increase? I don't think you're wrong, but explain how that ties together.
Again, if in a similar manner to the distribution channels, if there is a decrease in labor or if there's an increase in demand with those things, I would imagine that raw materials naturally might just be a little bit more expensive. And if the cookie industry is growing as well and more people are demanding those ingredients, that's probably going to lead to an increase.
Okay, makes sense.
In terms of storage and warehousing, that's actually increased the most. It looks like in 2020, it was around maybe 12%. And in 2022, we're looking at closer to 22%. So there's quite a large increase there over 2 years. And so that would be really interesting if we had a further breakdown of that. But we'll dive into that a little bit later. But I would imagine just from looking at this, that's probably now the biggest concern for me. And I'm shifting a little bit more away from distribution just because given that's the next one, that actually was stagnant for a year and then has only increased marginally. And that's the same with marketing and promotions. And so not only could 2022 be some sort of anomaly with, again, macroeconomic factors contributing to that, but it doesn't seem like it's increasing that much. And if they're noticing that they've had a steady decline in profit, then it's probably not there. SG&A, pretty stagnant. Maybe a later thing to look into would be actually increasing those costs in terms of trying to push more units. But I imagine that the root of the problem here lies within storage and warehousing and maybe a tiny bit in raw materials.
Great. Is there anything in here that confirms that we are probably growing revenue, like your hypothesis was there before?
Yeah, do you know what? That's a really good point that you bring that up. If raw materials are increasing, one possibility is that the actual price of raw materials is increasing, but it could also mean we're spending more. But I think the biggest thing would be distribution. If we're spending more in distribution, one of the options for that, and one of the reasons that could be, is actually we are distributing more products. And if we're distributing more products, we're probably growing in revenue.
Love it. Okay, great. Anything else you want to talk about here before we move on?
No, I'm happy to move on. Yeah.
Awesome. So I'll leave that there in case it's helpful context for you.
Okay.
What else do you want to talk about?
Do we have any more information on storage and warehousing? That's, again, where my concern is more focused now.
Yeah. Well, why don't you break it down? What do you think are the components of storage and warehousing? If we click down a layer, imagine that we were kind of creating an Excel spreadsheet, breaking that down into its subcomponents. What are the subcomponents of storage and warehousing here?
Well, you have to forgive me. I'm not an expert in the storage industry, but I would imagine the
not
biggest...
Not yet. Let me say again.
I would imagine the biggest cost is probably just the rent itself in terms of how much you're actually paying for this big storage and warehouse.
Okay.
If it's something like food, I would imagine there's probably also some sort of climate control in there. You don't want it to be humid. You don't want it to be too hot. So maybe that's an element. Another thing would be maybe in terms of actually inputting those and managing that storage facility. So my thought there immediately goes to Amazon when they have obviously it's a much bigger scale there, but they have millions of products coming in and out every day. And so actually hiring the workers to go ahead and manage that and bring the products in and out could be another thing. And then when it comes to cookie companies and food in general, there's probably some sort of cost associated with the loss of goods. So obviously, if you're selling a sofa or a couch, it's not going to expire. Whereas a cookie, if we're not selling enough units, which may not actually be the issue here, but if we're not selling enough units, we might not actually be able to ship out all our products before they expire. So
Okay.
I don't know if that would be under storage and warehousing or if that would be under raw materials or distribution, but that could be in there.
It's interesting that you mentioned that the product expiring piece. How is that a cost? Is that how would we actually put that on the books for the business?
So naturally, I would assume that if you're losing it, you're just not getting the revenue, and so you're paying 100% of the cost, or maybe not 100%, right? You're not paying for distribution, but you're paying for most of the cost, and you're incurring no revenue from that. So you are getting a negative profit with that.
Okay.
Am I on the right line?
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's poke into that a little bit more. We have noticed that inventory losses have spiked in the last 2 or 3 years. Can you suggest a couple of ways to potentially bring them under control?
Yeah. Do you mind if I just take 20, 30 seconds to organize my thoughts?
I'll let you do that just this once.
Thank you.
Hey, it's Eden with Management Consulted, your favorite go-to gal for anything and everything MC. I'm so excited to share with you today something really special. I don't know if you know this, but I provide 15-minute meetings for candidates who are looking for recruitment support. I can help you strategize and plan out how you're going to navigate through your recruitment season and exactly how MC can help you. In that meeting, we can review your resume and I can provide you some industry insights tailored to your specific background. And maybe, just maybe, I can sprinkle just a little bit of hope in there as well. I'd be excited to connect with you when you're ready to explore personalized coaching support, so feel free to book a meeting with me through the link in the show notes today.
Okay, so I came up with a few ideas there.
Great.
And let me just walk you through those.
Okay.
When it comes to those inventory losses, and I actually forgot to include one on that, there's 3 main categories I'd look at.
Okay.
The actual storage facility itself. So how are we storing them? Are the storage conditions good enough?
Okay.
And the management of there, are we tucking away a box of cookies in the back of the storage facility and forgetting about them until it's too late?
Great.
As well as not selling enough, so just not having enough turnover, maybe producing more than we can actually sell.
Okay.
And then the last thing would actually be in terms of the cookies themselves. If they're not fresh cookies like crumble or something else, maybe they're expiring too fast and there's room for optimization there. But I would really want to drill down on the first 2.
Awesome. How'd you fix them?
Yeah. So if we're talking about the bad storage itself, the climate is one thing we could fix, making sure the storage facility isn't getting too humid, making sure it's not getting too hot. An important caveat there is that is something that the packaging itself should be doing. In terms of the management systems, maybe there are none in place. Maybe the management systems are suboptimal, but I would make sure that we're really adopting and not to get to accounting here, but a FIFO method in terms of first in, first out. We should actually do LIFO, last in, first out.
You sure?
Let me define it, and then we can make sure that I've got the right one. Whatever is going into the, so it would be FIFO. Whatever's going into the warehouse first should be the first to come out.
Makes sense.
We don't want months where cookies are sitting in place where there's turnover of other cookies.
Absolutely.
Especially if we have one bad month of sales, that could really pile up and make the issue worse. In terms of not selling enough, I think that the biggest solution there would be some sort of analytics, just making sure we can predict more accurately how many units we're forecasted to sell. And then we just make a little bit more obviously than that, and make sure that we're not making way too many when maybe during a recession or during changing times, people aren't buying as many cookies. Again, I don't think that's the issue. It's probably one of the first ones.
Okay, love it. So great. At this point, I think we are getting pretty close to time on the case. I'm going to ask you just to provide a final recommendation for the client. I know that, of course, there are things that we could look at if we had more time. But if we were just here, you're in an elevator and the CEO is there, what would you say?
Yeah, well, thank you for meeting me. I think the most important thing to note here is that these storage and warehousing costs are getting too high and are actually creating an issue for the profitability of the company. And I think to fix this, we really need to look into the root of that. And I think one of the biggest roots could be the climate and also the management systems in place. So in terms of some next steps, I think developing, if we don't already have it, some sort of management system to make sure that all of our inventory is getting out in the right time and is not getting clogged by other units. I think that's going to be the best way to solve this problem. Now, I will say that a risk with that is if we start incurring even more money on this and we can't find the issue soon enough, we could potentially be driving our profits even further down.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
All right, so let me provide some feedback. You ready for this?
Yeah.
First of all, just what were your thoughts? How did you feel? What did you like? What do you think you could have done better?
Yeah, as a pretty math-focused person, I always love it when there's more calculations involved and maybe less of the creativity side. But I really enjoyed this case. I thought the exhibit itself wasn't too difficult to read into. I definitely had to pivot once or twice. I think we noticed that throughout the case that I almost felt like I was led into one place, and then it was like, actually, with this piece of information, I need to just quickly pivot. And so I think that's really good practice to be able to do that, because that's what happens a lot of the time, both in case interviews and in the real world. But I think I maybe could have been a little bit more structured in terms of once we knew it was storage and warehousing, figuring out the potential solutions. I probably could have listed a few more there and maybe dug into those.
Love it. So I'll just provide you with my feedback. Again, overall, really good job. I got the general sense that you knew it was happening, that you were being insightful, that you were layering on those insights. Of course, every consultant can find something that they can improve on. So I'm going to just go through. I thought with your beginning, I thought you did a really good job. Both the recap was clear, concise. This is a very short one, doesn't need to be long. The only thing that I might have enhanced there was just really making sure that you reflected on this question of whether you thought if it was a macroeconomic issue where others were doing well, was it because they had been cost cutting, or was it because they had been punching revenue growth, expecting that based on what we've seen in the last couple of years with inflation, but also with the improvement in consumer goods purchasing, it's probably going to be a cost issue. I think you could have identified that earlier. Okay. And you don't even have to necessarily ask it as a clarifying question, but just giving me that context as a heads up would have really kind of improved that. And it would have helped me make sure that you were focusing on profitability, because actually when you went to your structure, I wasn't 100% sure. Okay. I also just thought you could have maybe provided me some of the context for your questions. So really good questions, but here's why I'm asking. If we need to look outside of the US, obviously there will be a much broader scope of this. There's a lot of complexity in the way that we think about our supply chain. So I'm assuming we're going to focus on the US, right? So giving me just a little bit more of that background, you had more time, felt like you were rushing to get into the structure. And there's a difference between kind of command and rushing at the beginning. So I think you have a little bit more time to sit back into it, really kind of, marinate on the issues and also explain to me what those are. With your structure, I think, again, really good kind of core questions. I give you a 3 on the structure. And actually, I gave you the ratings for everything. Let me go back to that. So I give you
not out of 10, right?
No, out of 4. So in the MC case scoring, 3.5 for the case recap and a 3 for the clarifying questions. And then I give you a 3 for the case structure. And the guidance here is that it has at least 3 buckets. You did. The buckets have 3 ideas that focus on data, a little bit light on that. But the ideas are meaty. I felt like that was pretty good. I would have liked to have seen 2 different things to make it a 4. One is I wanted you to present me costs first. Yeah. Right. When I asked you the question, you got there, but you had a full extra minute in your preparation time, or you could have thought about it, punched a little deeper on the costs, and presented it. Even if you wrote down revenues, cost, market, you could have presented the cost first.
Gotcha.
I would have liked to have seen that. Anytime we're doing a profitability case and you're able to just not walk me through, here's what the profitability is, and kind of more like, here's what I think the issue is, I'm going to appreciate that, especially when I'm in BCG. Yeah. And then in addition, you kind of said, I'm going to keep it at a high level. I don't want a high level. I actually do really want a more comprehensive structure here. So I would have wanted for your revenues to highlight not just the units sold and the prices sold, but maybe product mix or something else kind of focused on the revenue side, right? Or discounting, inflation, right? Okay. Like impacts of those things. So in fact, I think that here you could have actually broken out revenues into prices and quantities. Or I think you could have broken out costs. Yeah. But if you're going to do the market piece, just make sure that you don't include. I think what is challenging about this specific structure is that you have to make sure it's meaty, so you can't go too detailed on the revenue side and include the market piece as well. Yeah. So you might have just wanted to go a little bit more granular on a traditional market profitability structure, but just reorganize it a little bit so you could go a little bit more detailed. And so good job, but I think there was a grade there that you could have attained. On the case math question, I could tell you were thrilled about the case. Obviously, with BCG, you have to lead yourself into it, which is why at the end of the structure, I asked you the question about costs. I asked you to delineate what the costs were. You could have done that independently a little bit better. Also, at one point you mentioned it. I don't know if it was misspeaking, but you mentioned that it was percentage increase. And I don't know if you were making a calculation or if you were reading this as percentage instead of millions of dollars. So just make sure that as you're talking through it, I would just give the context at the beginning, right? This is in dollars. So these are real increases, right? And then I will calculate the percentages. Just maybe for me, the interviewer lay out for me, because a lot of those insights I thought were pretty good. And then I also, you mentioned that there might have been a decrease in labor on the raw material side. Again, I think it may have been misspeaking. I think you were talking about decrease in labor availability. Yes. Is that right? Right.
When you talked about
leading to a price increase of labor. And so, but there were a few things that kind of didn't follow linear thinking there. And so again, I gave you a 3 under 5 minutes, actually maybe too little time. But I really wanted you to begin to punch into those extra things that I asked you about on the end. When I asked you, you did a good job. For the case creative stuff, when you started to break this down, I got a little nervous. You have a pretty great mental recall, but you didn't write down the brainstorming list of the different factors. So in a couple times you kept like putting the cap on the pen and putting it down. And so I would just say maybe keep yourself poised at the ready, especially in a BCG case because of the brainstorming and the leading. If you're in a McKinsey case, you're going to know when they're moving on. In a BCG case, maybe not. So just to think about that.
When it comes to that, I can't remember if I asked for more time then, maybe like 30 seconds.
You did, yeah.
Okay. Is that the right step then for someone to do in that?
You can always do it. I would just say if we're practicing, I was tempted because in BCG, I generally would say, no, this is conversational. And so contextually in McKinsey, yes, in BCG, no, in Bain, maybe, practice it both ways. And so I was tempted to say no, but I felt like giving you a break on this one. So it could have gone either way for you. Always, it's fine to ask. Just be ready to have them say no. And if they say no the first time, never ask again.
That's a really good piece of advice,
And then finally, on the case creative question. So again, I thought you did a good job of listing out the initial level, but it was really just a brainstorming list and it didn't address what I asked you. I think you could have clarified what I asked. What I asked specifically was, can you suggest some ways to bring them under control? And so you gave me what the problems could be, but not the solutions. And so we had to go back to that. And you didn't write down what the solutions were as you were talking through it. So I feel like that will lead me into my final piece. So kind of three across the board there too. And then on the final recommendation, I felt like that was like a 2.53. I think that at the beginning you could have just given one sentence of context, right? We're looking at profitability that's out of line with market growth of other competitors. We found that the issue was, right, just a little bit more of a story format. And I felt like if you had the notes and the responses, you might have been able to tick a few of those things off a little bit more clearly. I would also just recommend in your risks and next steps that you number them for me. I was taking notes and I actually don't know if you had 1, 2, or 3. I don't know if you were subheading or if you were moving on. And so just, right at the very end, right? When I'm going to walk out and score you on whether you were structured or not, give me the most structured final recommendations if you can.
Wonderful.
Other than that, final questions?
I guess in terms of the conclusion there, straight into it, no time to formulate or anything, given it's a BCG case.
And good that way, yes, exactly.
And so should I keep the pen cap there and just give you it verbally with the structure?
I think that's fine. I wouldn't normally have you write down anything during the final recommendation. It's really just during the brainstorming. And so if I ask you a question and you're thinking through things, if you what you risk if you don't write it down is that you talk through them, you have great ideas, and you forget them when you move on to the next section. So just in terms of organization and structure, just trying to keep everything together.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
As you're preparing for case interviews, there are all sorts of hurdles that you face, and we'd love to help coach you through how to jump over those hurdles smoothly and cleanly to land yourself a consulting offer. We're talking about joining our Black Belt Case Prep program. It gives you expert coaching, resume and cover letter edits, expert strategy to walk through the networking and recruiting process, and so much more. Learn more about Black Belt, link in this episode's show notes. We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we'll catch you on another episode of Strategy Simplified soon.